And welcome to the Root of All Eagles podcast. I'm your host, James Webb. And today, following on from the NFL draft episode, I wanted to take a look at some alternative routes the Eagles can take in the 2023 draft later on this month. In the last episode, we talked at length about the game of Texas Longhorns running back Bijan Robinson and what he might bring to the offense. On this episode, we're going to break down some other options that the Eagles might have in the draft, so stay tuned.
You're now listening to the Root of All Eagles podcast, where we break down the latest news about your beloved bird.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go! Hit it!
And now, your host, James Webb. Fly, Eagles, fly.
Of course, many consider Bijan to be the best running back in the class, and there is a good reason for those beliefs. He has the exceptional footwork and great vision and plays the game smart, always looking downfield for the next incoming defender so he can set that man up and weave around him. I love the prospect of Bijan, and letting a prospect like that land with another team when you know he'd do great things for your organization is always difficult. But we have to think about value, and the Eagles are in a position where they can take the very best player available and whoever they think would make the biggest impact to what is a Super Bowl contending roster already. That number 10 selection needs to be on the field making a difference in week 1. There's no alternative. It's a luxury pick that a team playing in the Super Bowl just a couple of months ago has no business having their hands on. And we need to ensure we make that pick work in a hurry. So one of the obvious choices there is Bijan. It's a luxury pick. The Eagles can afford to use it just about on anyone that they want, and he would be an impact player who likely wins the starting job over Rashad Penny. But is it spending too much too early on the position? Now, I get the whole argument that historically the Eagles don't draft running backs in the first round. It just doesn't happen. But this is, in fact, as I've already said, it's a luxury pick for the Eagles. So when we're looking at what Bijan Robinson could potentially bring to the Eagles, man, I'm just getting so excited just talking about him because he really brings a difference maker to the offense. Either way, the Eagles are in the market for a running back. Their current roster reads as follows: Boston Scott on a $1.9 million, Rashad Penny on a 1-year deal from Seattle on $1.2 million, Trey Sermon on near enough the league minimum, and Kenneth Gainwell on his rookie deal making around $900,000. Out of the four, the only viable starter is Rashad Penny, but the Eagles never paid him a salary that would point towards believing that he can be that guy. He's also coming off of a very complex surgery to repair a broken fibula and what's considered to be a nasty ankle sprain. So it would be irresponsible of the Eagles to bring him in and expect him to take on Miles Sanders' workload. The Eagles, of course, have a quarterback who is going to run the football, but Sanders still had 259 carries in 2022. So who's taking those on? We can't just simply rely on Penny for that. And I don't see either Boston Scott or Kenneth Gainwell in lead roles. That's just not the type of players that they are. They're very specific talents who can contribute in a rotation. This is definitely not a knock on Boston Scott or Kenneth Gainwell. I absolutely love what Kenneth Gainwell did in the postseason last year for the Eagles. And Boston Scott, we all know him to be the giant killer. That's just what he is. And if you haven't heard about it, then you need to ask somebody. Boston Scott is the giant killer. Let's go ahead and dive in to what the Eagles can do in the draft. The Eagles must add a running back who offers a genuine threat as a starting back alongside Jalen in the backfield. And luckily for us, it is in fact a very deep running back class. So let's start with Zach Cabernet, UCLA Bruins running back, who has managed back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons and 27 rushing touchdowns over those 2 years. Sensational production at the college level, and the type of player you'd have no concern starting as a rookie in week 1. He's a 2022 first-team All-American, 1,359 yards and 14 rushing touchdowns this past season. 3 games with 3 touchdowns apiece and only 2 fumbles in 2 seasons combined. So you know already from him that he's reliable with the football. He's not going to turn over the ball too many times. Cabernet is 6 foot, 215 pounds, the optimal weight for a pro running back, and he has a great burst for a player of his size and weight. He ran a 4.53 40-yard dash, which likely makes him a day 2 pick, but his acceleration really jumps off the page. Okay, so he's not a burner in the open field, but there's a lot that he can do, and he can really cause some damage at the line of scrimmage. And once he's shot through the gap and into the second level, his balance and ability to bounce off tackles likely means a lot of additional yardage after contact. He's one of the most proven runners between the tackles, which is not that common in this year's running back class, despite there being a good number of options available. Cabernet looks like a real power back who's going to pound the football up the middle and take some of the strain off of the passing game. Linebackers will have to tuck in on him, and that could open up outside runs for Jalen Hurts. Cabernet offers experience as a passing down option as well. In the last 2 seasons, he's had 61 catches for over 500 receiving yards. So you could be looking at a real 3-down starter if he does in fact live up to the expectations in the league. If you're looking at the risk, you'd have to obviously note his speed. Plus 4.5 is not ideal for any NFL running back, but it's also not enough to put you off from drafting him with a day 2 pick. For context, Cabernet's 4.53 40 is the exact same time that Dalvin Cook ran in 2017, and he was a day 2 selection. Philly has the 62nd pick on the second day of the draft, which might end up being too late for Cabernet. So there's something to think about there. Is it worth trading down from 10 to accumulate picks? Or do you take the best talent available at the 10 spot and then trade back from 30? Or do you just pick Cabernet at 30 and then you come away from the first round with the difference maker likely on the defensive side and your new starting running back? Then you have Israel Abanikanda out of Pitt, nicknamed Izzy. This is a guy I could really see the Eagles fans starting to love real quick. Numbers are good. He had 1,431 rushing yards in 2022, 21 total touchdowns, which was joint first in the country, along with Tajay Spears out of Tulane. Izzy was also named a first-team All-American, and while he split the leading touchdown scorer claim with Spears, it's worth noting that he did so in 3 less games. He was taken out of a game midway and missed the following game with an injury, so his numbers are even more impressive than they look. He had 239 carries and averaged 6 yards per carry, while also adding 12 receptions for 146 yards and a receiving touchdown. Great body of work. Hasn't been beaten up too bad, only has 1 full year as a starter. The previous year, he had 123 carries, and the year before that, only 28. So he's pretty fresh, and there's a lot to like about his game too. First of all, he does have the speed that Zach Cabernet lacks. Lots of breakaway runs and long touchdowns, and if he gets away from the defense, he's not getting caught. His straight line speed is excellent, and he's got a second gear that jumps out of his tape. He didn't run at the combine, but scouts are estimating he runs around the low 4.340s, which is frankly ridiculous for a guy who runs with the power that he does. He's 5'11", 215 pounds, so again, great size and body type for the league. However, he's not quite as well-rounded as a prospect as Cabernet is, and I guess this all comes down to how you want to use this guy and whether his flaws are an issue for your football team. Abanikanda doesn't have very fluid hips, and he lacks cutbacks and juke moves. He's a talented straight line runner who will arc his runs well against the defense, but lacks the ability to juke a man out of his shoes with a sharp cut against the momentum of his body. While he has the speed, that lack of fluidity will also cost him a spot on day 1 of the draft. As a day 2 pick, he is more likely to be available at 62nd pick than Cabernet is, but still a risky move to sit at the 62nd pick and wait in anticipation that he might be there. I like Abanikanda's upside. Who knows, with some coaching, he might be able to loosen up a little bit and turn into an every down starter in the league. He's certainly got the physical tools to be that type of player, but it's that lack of agility in tight spaces that could dent his stock. I like both of those running backs. I'm a fan of Cabernet and the things he does well, and I'm a fan of Abanikanda and the things that he does really well at Pitt. One is more of a ground and pound between the tackles, while the other is an explosive runner who could burn the defense on long runs, but might not offer you as much production on the other 17 reps in a game. There are, of course, others. Devon Aiken is another speedster who will be off the boards on day 2. He's a little smaller, though, and has a lighter frame. Then you've got Keandre Miller out of TCU. There's a lot to like about him, too. He's a really well-balanced runner, but again, not the perfect prospect. This is why I think Bijan is so heavily favored as the first back off the board. He isn't going to run a 4.2 40 or anything crazy like that in terms of speed, but from a polished running back's perspective in this year's draft class, he's as good as it gets. He's very talented, and the question comes back to whether or not we need him. You could spend that 10th pick on him, or trade back a little and maybe still get him, and you'd end up with an A-plus prospect with a lot of potential to be great in the league. But do the Eagles need an A-plus running back? What's wrong with a B-grade running back on day 2 and 2 very genuine difference makers on day 1? Let's look into that. Say we keep the number 10 pick and ignore the running back option until at least the 30th pick. What do we do with 10? The advantage here is knowing at least 4 quarterbacks are going to go off the board before the Eagles pick at number 10. So in reality, we have the number 6 pick in the non-quarterback draft, which makes that pick sound even more juicy than it was a moment ago. One of my favorite prospects for the pick is Jalen Carter. Talent-wise, he is without a doubt one of the very best players in this year's class, and maybe the best. Incredible athlete, played basketball in high school, and I believe he was also a weightlifter. He's just excellent at sports. He stepped into a leading role at Georgia in 2022 after shared snaps the previous 2 seasons, and he dominated. He's everywhere, plays the game with a truly significant motor, always following the football and making plays all over the field. He can play just about anywhere across the defensive line and has built experience in shedding blockers with a wide range of moves. He fights through contact well and can get his hands on the ball carrier while engaged, which is always a sign of a guy who plays the game hard and is willing to make a play no matter what. Carter is also freakishly strong, which I guess comes with the territory of being a high school weightlifter, quite often just blowing offensive linemen away with his sheer power at the point of contact. He's without a doubt a starter at the next level. The ability to play the run and plug any gap across the defensive line, no matter the assignment, is astounding. But he's also a very fluid and natural pass rusher. He can fight through contact on the interior of the line with swim and spin moves and regularly finds himself in the backfield. He's shown production at multiple gap responsibilities, and he's still so young and can further improve his game in many ways. He's not the most polished player in the draft, but I am more than okay with that considering the talent he has. He really feels like one of those blue chip football players who you could line up just about anywhere on your defensive line and watch him wreak havoc, which is perfect for our team that just allowed Javon Hargrave to walk in free agency and features 2 aging Eagles legends in Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox. Drafting Jalen Carter would reunite him with Jordan Davis, having both played at Georgia, and that could be the anchor of your defensive line for the next 5 to 10 years, just as Graham and Fletch have been for the last 10. There's a lot to love about Jalen Carter, but there's a chance he's not available at 10, with 5 teams ahead of us and also not in the market for a quarterback. I feel like if he's available, the Eagles would draft him in a heartbeat, and definitely over Bijan Robinson. It just makes too much sense. That's the kind of impact player I'm talking about with the 10th overall pick. It has to be a player that's okay, has some areas of development as any rookie would, but can get on the field on the very first day of the season and go out and make a difference. Carter is that, and we can address the running back situation accordingly, either at 30 or in the second round. I'd feel very good about that. Of course, there are other alternatives when it comes to the best player available. Peter Skoronski is considered the best tackle in this year's draft class. Is he a good option to consider for the long-term health of our quarterback and his offensive line? Of course he is. Skoronski is a very well-built offensive tackle who will come into the league with good experience, having been a 3-year starter in college. He's the sort of tackle who will be a day one starter without question. He's got a great football IQ, really understands the game well, and uses his knowledge and experience to win against pass rushers consistently. His technique is outstanding. He's got great size. He's versatile, and he's very, very effective in the run game. And we know already that Jeff Stoutland, obviously, he loves his offensive line. He's the offensive line coach. But if there's anybody who can make an offensive lineman reach their full potential, it's Jeff Stoutland. And then on top of that, just look what Jeff Stoutland did with Jordan Mailata. He took a 7th round or undrafted rugby player and turned him into a top 10 tackle in the NFL. So there's maybe a position we could look for with the 2nd or 3rd pick. There are some good offensive linemen in this year's draft, and while it may not feel like a priority right now, neither Jason Kelce or Lane Johnson are going to be around forever. We're fortunate to have Landon and Cam Jurgens, but we need some depth that can grow into starting roles as the older guys eventually move on. And that year that Cam has had learning and growing behind Hall of Famer Jason Kelce is also invaluable. You've also got Blake Freeland out of BYU. He's got great size. He's a great blocker out in front in the run game, and he's an effective pass rusher. He feels like a good value pick for the Eagles in the 3rd round. And when you get to that point in the draft, you're not looking for impact starters. You're more trying to add value that can grow into a starting role over time. Then there's Wanya Morris, who just really needs to land in the right spot with the right coaches in the league. He's played right and left tackle and went from Tennessee to Oklahoma during his college career, starting experience at both, and has a lot of potential with his size and frame to grow into an NFL tackle. But he needs discipline and coaching to reframe his game the right way. There's a lot of raw talent there. An NFL franchise just needs to help him nurture it. And who better than Jeff Stoutland? I wouldn't be mad with the Eagles selecting offensive line help at all in the 2nd or 3rd round, but I do absolutely want to see 2 impact starters on day 1. If Howie wants to trade out of the number 10 pick, it needs to be because he's turning those 2 impact starters into 3. For example, if we traded the 10 pick for a pick in the late teens and then got a 2nd rounder out of it too, then suddenly we have 2 first rounders and an early 2nd, which could be the difference between Jalen Carter and a running back and 2 defensive impact players. Okay, not at quite the same impact level as a Carter and a running back as well. One thing is for sure, the Eagles are in the driver's seat and have control of their own fate in this year's draft. Having 2 firsts is a very strong position for a team that has just been to the Super Bowl. But there is certainly some pressure there to get the picks right. So if I'm looking at the draft personally for myself, I'm looking at number 1 on the top of my board would be Jalen Carter. I'm taking Jalen Carter. I would even consider moving up to trade for Jalen Carter. Up to, I go as far as to the 5th pick to get Jalen Carter. Another thing that we could do, and I haven't touched too much about it on this episode, but last week we talked a little bit about Brian Branch, and I just really love Brian Branch, the way he plays the game. He's an absolute dog, and I could see the Eagles really, really benefiting from somebody like Brian Branch. And that is, in my opinion, that's the biggest need that the Eagles have, is safety going into next season. So if you trade to the middle of the first round and you get somebody like Brian Branch, and then you accumulate some more picks along the way, then that's a great pick, in my opinion, too. We know Howie Roseman to be a master negotiator. It wouldn't be surprising to see Howie Roseman even possibly trade back and get another first round pick out of it. I mean, this is kind of what Howie does. He gets so much value when he trades assets away. And then the last option, and this is kind of like a fantasy one for me, but I just can't get over Bijan Robinson. The Eagles could just swap him up at 10, just take him right off the board. And I would absolutely love that pick of Bijan Robinson. To me, he just looks like the most complete running back in this year's draft. Even NFL.com, I think it was yesterday, they even said that not only is Bijan Robinson the running back with the most potential in the NFL draft, but he's the player with the highest ceiling overall in the NFL draft. But what do you guys think? Should the Eagles look at Bijan Robinson? Should we go to Jalen Carter, Deion Branch? Or should we look at some of these other moves? Maybe look to move around the draft and gain some more draft picks. Feel free to leave your comments or your questions below. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this episode. In the next episode, we're going to be most likely, barring anything breaking that could happen in the next week, we're going to be looking at our third mock draft ahead of the upcoming NFL draft. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you don't already, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Root of All Eagles. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, do me a big, huge favor. Please subscribe to the podcast. Also, it would be very helpful for me if you could give me a 5-star review. In the comments, you can talk about who you'd like to see the Eagles draft. What is your dream scenario for the Eagles in this year's upcoming draft? Let me know. Until next time.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Root of All Eagles podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Root of All Eagles, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode.